Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we have Maria Mangini, who is a fascinating person, and I'm so glad I finally got to meet her in person. Maria is a prominent figure in both the psychedelics field, the holistic health field, a nurse midwife, educator, researcher, and so much more. We get together for this episode to talk again about the Shulgin Farm, the Shulgin kind of legacy project, foundation, and Maria's interactions with Anne and Sasha over the years, and much more. Yeah, it was a really fun one, really heartful one. I love that Maria did a bunch of work with the Grofs in the early days at Esalen. So really a fun scenario there for us to dig into, because if you don't know, Kyle and I have a real thing for holotropic breath work, transpersonal psychology, and that's the import of Stan in part is much more. But yeah, so love that. Love Maria's approach here. So much valuable stuff in this episode. So I might actually suggest you listen to this one 2 or 3 times. But I appreciate you all tuning in to Psychedelics Today. Learn more about what's going on at the Shulgin Farm by looking up the Shulgin Foundation. And if you're interested in getting involved with the future of this thing, please do try. Reach out, contact them, see if you can go for a cleanup, or what is it that the Shulgin Farm project needs? Yeah, or what would the psychedelic community need that the foundation could help support? So love that. So I think that's it for now. Thank you all for tuning in to Psychedelics Today. We will see you on the other side of this podcast. Enjoy this episode of Maria Mangini. A quick update on classes and events. We have a few retreats coming up. So we've got a psychedelic cannabis and transpersonal breathwork retreat coming up in Agora Hills, California. This is a little bit north, I think, of Los Angeles, kind of south of Ventura a little bit. The dates are April 28th through May 3rd. Holistic Therapeutics are putting it on. There will be many Vital grads there. It's really a Vital retreat, but we're doing a real retreat with real experiences, but infusing a bunch of education in there. That's kind of how that works. So there are some spaces there. Looks like there's some spaces in a breathwork retreat in Pennsylvania, July 9th through 14th. And a similar event to the first one, Psychedelic Cannabis and Transpersonal Breathwork, October 20 through 25, again in Agora Hills, California. Check that one out for sure. And then we've got some really fun stuff coming up with Navigating Psychedelics. Now that Vital's on, we can teach Navigating Psychedelics again. The dates for this cohort is a 9-week program. Starts May 8 or May 9. So you can have a Wednesdays or Thursdays cohort. The first one kicks off at around noon Eastern. The second one kicks off at 8 p.m. Eastern. So please check that out. It's a 9-week program, 47 hours or so. It's going to be amazing. So please do check it out. And I think that's it for right now. So thank you for tuning in again. And thanks for listening. And check it all out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com or psychedelics.com. All right. Thanks. Bye. Hi, everybody. Psychedelics Today. I am with Maria Mangini. How are you today?
I'm well. I'm in a place that I like a lot.
We are in Sasha's old office. Beautiful file cabinets. I have the books behind me.
Yeah, and Sasha's lab notebooks and
the treasures right inside this.
Yeah.
Can't even imagine. So you've been around this space quite a bit.
I'm part of the sort of larger social network that was attracted by the energy of the Shulgins and has come here for a variety of reasons, for celebrations, the customary things that were always done here on certain holidays. But also toward the end of Anne's life, especially, I was part of a group that met monthly with her that was specifically constructed to be able to take her advice about things like ethical issues that might be thorny to deal with, or difficult patients who might have had an unproductive experience, or, how to introduce a new person to the social environment, or how to how to reintroduce somebody who had been kind of on the outs with people for a reason or so, and things like that, about which Anne could give some very useful and thoughtful
advice. Was this the
advice.
Grand Rounds?
Mm-hmm. Well, it wasn't. It was actually called the Tea Party. I'm the one who called it a Grand Rounds. Grand Rounds is a convention in medicine, and it was kind of like that. I mean, that's why I said that. But that's one of the uses that I can imagine the farm being put to now that Anne is no longer here, that like to create that kind of vortexical energy where people can bring conundra that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to solve without the help of some more experienced or more diversely aware, the wider reading experience or bigger, different experience, and older folks who've gone through different kinds of life stuff. It's good for people to have that. And it's good to know where it is. Because, you don't clean the downspout when it's raining, right?
Agreed. Yeah. Well, that's fun. And I think super critical for this scene right now. We need to be in conversations about not only sharing our knowledge, but also asking for advice from a community. I've been seeing a lot more of these consultation groups pop up in the clinical space, and it's really good. But, I think we need it a little more broad than that.
Well, they're like, it seems like it's my opinion that all spiritual and intellectual evolution is supposed to be economical. You're not supposed to say, oh, yeah, that was when I was a cheerleader and I'm so much smarter now, because you're supposed to use that stuff. You only get a year's experience in a year. And if you don't make use of what you have, you are impeding your own progress. And I do think that being integrated into a group that can speak frankly and share its varieties of experience and wisdom is extremely helpful. Now, it's easy for me to say that because I'm part of a big collective that has been in existence for almost 60 years now. And we know that more heads are better than one,
Hard won lesson.
Well, yeah. But years ago, when we were in the first phase of trying to buy the property that we inhabit in northern Mendocino County, we had a mortgage from a dentist whose name was Dr. Shin. And, every couple of months, a little sign would appear on the refrigerator, we need $10,000 for Dr. Shin by Tuesday. And then underneath that, it would say something like, anarchy means having to put up with a lot of things that really piss you off, And these are lessons learned from the experience of trying to share your lawnmower, your dishwashing, your tube of toothpaste, your emotional upsets, the dinner of your children when you're not home at the time when you're expected with a bunch of other people. And I know that has worked really well for us.
So many questions about that one. I'm kind of curious, like when did you start coming into this orbit of the Shulgin landscape?
I have to be a little thoughtful about how I describe this because there are certain things, because I've had a long life of experience with psychedelics. I had my first, that's one of the reasons I put this on, because I had my first experience with unusual states of consciousness of any kind when I was about 2 weeks, about almost exactly right now. This part, I'm going to have my birthday in February 5th, and just a few days before my birthday, I had my first encounter with LSD. And it really kind of changed my life in a very particular way. But if you think about that, that was 1966. There's been a lot of the great majority of the time since then, the behaviors that have to do with these substances have been forbidden, a lot of the time secret. I think I mentioned that I also like to emphasize the fact that they are sacred and that you don't want to vulgarize things that are sacred, so that there have been some conventions and proprieties and promises that I have been asked to make or appropriately chose to make or to observe to protect the behavior and the people doing it and the substances themselves. And so I have a habit with that. And it makes it harder for me to go back and say, how did I do this? But I had the good fortune. I've had a lot of kind of serendipitous encounters, especially with elders and teachers. I've been very, very fortunate in that way. And by a series of strange coincidences, in 1975, I was part of the team that helped Stan Grof and his wife at that time, Joan Halifax, organize their long-form workshops programs at Esalen. So people were starting to know about Sasha in, like that period between about 1975 and 1980 was when MDMA was just starting to kind of get out into the world.
Before holotropic breathwork.
Oh, so way before. Oh, way before. Because now let me stop and say holotropic breathwork. At the time when I first encountered Stan Grof, he was married to Joan Halifax Grof. They later separated, and he married Christina Healy Grof.
Is that her maiden name?
Healy, yeah.
Okay.
And I was the best lady at their wedding.
Oh my gosh. No way.
And Christina, I wouldn't presume to tell Christina's story because Christina has written a couple of books about what happened with her. But Christina, I think Stan would be the first person to acknowledge that Christina was his full co-equal partner in the development of holotropic breathwork. But that was later. And it occurred because a lot of transformations and developments had happened largely in her life that made it necessary to find a way of achieving some of these deeply transformative states of consciousness that did not involve the use of substances. One of which was they were living at Esalen, and Esalen did not took a dim view of the use of substances for its own safety and reputation during that period of time. So the holotropic breathwork was an outgrowth of the personal developments in the lives of the people who developed it. But that was later. And that was actually after I left that holotropic breathwork started to really happen.
I love that you got to spend time with Joan. It's amazing.
Joan is a force of nature.
I hope to be able to interview her at some point if I get to New Mexico again. And hopefully she's willing.
Well, Joan, Joan was a medical anthropologist when she and Stan married. And she had worked for Alan Lomax. So she had a really wide acquaintance with what is now referred to as world music. Mm-hmm. And they had a shelf with LPs in it that had, the singing of the Landayaks of Borneo. And music you'd never heard anywhere else, which I think Joan introduced a lot of that stuff. And it was when people were really sort of thinking about playlists and how that could be an influential factor. And I think she has a kind of unsung role in that, particularly introducing some of the kinds of ethnic music that she was really aware of that other people didn't know.
Yeah, I love that. So you've been at this for a bit.
Yeah. And, my entire adult life.
Right. Yeah, I think I started bumping into Stan's books in 2001, and I was about 19 years old reading Stan as an undergrad. I'm like, what is this? And sent me here. It's a long, long path.
Well, I bought into, I'm a great respecter of Stan Grof's genius. He is a real synthetic thinker. And I think that when you know that somebody is experiencing and expressing an insight that's really deeply true, one of the ways that I have responded to those when they've come up for me is that I want to say, well, why didn't I think of that? It's so obvious that this is correct. And the thing that was kind of taking shape at the time when I kind of joined the party in Big Sur was the book about that talks about what Stan calls the basic perinatal matrices. And what he basically asserts is that the biologic process of giving birth and being born has stages that are analogous to other forms of transformative consciousness, sometimes in unusual states, sometimes dying. And that was one of those insights that was like, well, yeah, But when it was time for me to leave Esalen, I was kind of at loose ends because I don't know why anybody really wants to leave Esalen. It's like being thrown out of the Garden of Eden. But I was kind of trying to figure out what was going to happen next for me. One of the important, influential things that happened to me during the time that I was associated with Stan and with Joan and with Christina and with that work was all these other people were attracted by the energy that they generated to come to them. And I got exposed to them because I was right there. And one of the people that I was really fond of and spent a lot of time with and had some really fabulous conversations with was Gregory Bateson, whom I just loved. And he and his wife, Lois, had suggested that because I was in San Francisco and they were in the Santa Cruz Mountains, that sometime when I was driving home, I should come and see them. So I was kind of I was leaving Esalen. I was feeling kind of empty. And I thought, well, I'll call up the Batesons and see if they can have me over for lunch. And they agreed to do it. And we had we had lunch, we drank a couple bottles of wine. And Gregory interrogated me about what I did, what I studied as an undergraduate, what I read for pleasure. He was kind of unpacking my head. And once we got through all of that, he said, well, I think you should become a midwife. And I was such an empty house that I said, okay. No. And he took me and introduced me to their neighbor, who is a woman named Raven Lang, who is one of the Santa Cruz midwives who really kind of started the home birth movement in the United States, wrote the first book about home delivery called The Birth Book, and is a genius in her own right, which I could talk about. But I got to join Raven's rounds group, her senior midwives rounds, where the midwives met together to share all the things that we were thinking about that could be covered in rounds, even though I had no midwifery experience, because I understood Stan's perspective that he's voiced in his theories, and they wanted to hear about that. So they introduced me to their skills, and I tried to answer whatever questions I could answer about what the ideas that Stan had asserted in his writing sounded like. Eventually, this is a time when midwives here in California were being arrested for practicing medicine without a license. And it was clear to me that I was not encumbered by small children or dying parents or any of the things that would prevent me from going to school. So I went on and got some credentials in the interest of becoming somebody who could give some cover to people who had those kinds of family circumstances that really didn't support their going back to school, which I did. But that was the reason that part of the reason that I didn't have anything to do with the development of holotropic breathwork, because that was right about the time when I went to New York to go to school. And I decided to be a family nurse practitioner because I already had a bachelor's degree, and you could get a master's degree in nursing if you wanted to do that. So I did that. And then I came back to California and took my midwifery training at at University of California, San Francisco.
Master's of nursing?
A master's in nursing as an FNP, and then my certification as a nurse midwife from UCSF.
Beautiful. Wow. I love that. That's amazing. And yeah, midwifery is so interesting and fascinating.
Well, it's now that I'm involved in all these training programs, I've been really kind of vocal about the fact that there is a specific skill set that midwives for the most part actually have to possess, because it's the matter of what they do that is identical or very, very similar to the skills that are needed for somebody who wants to be the ground control for somebody in an unusual state of consciousness, for somebody who wants to sit at the bedside of someone who's actively dying. Those skills are the most difficult part of what we try to teach in those programs. You can't really transmit that stuff very well in the classroom, but the midwives bring it. They already come with it.
That's amazing. My mother was a nurse. I always say nurses are some of the best trip sitters and facilitators, and I hear that repeated often too.
Well, that's a timely point of view because, once again, I've seen a lot of records and photographs and pictures and different things from Stan's history. And I've certainly seen pictures of him in his early experiments in Czechoslovakia, in which the nurses are clearly present. They're in their iconic white outfit and their little pointy hat.
Stan wasn't always in the room for these things. No. He was in and out of the room because he's doing so many per day.
And the thing about this is that nobody ever identifies them. They're not named. Nobody ever says what their role was. They were just there. So nurses have always been part of these practices. And now I'm really there. Andrew Penn has started this group called Open Nurses with some other nurses. And we share a desire to be sure that as policy decisions get made about how people are going to be able to approach experience with psychedelics, that it's clear that nurses need to have a place at the table because they have some unique contributions to make and a history also.
Yeah. Do you know CJ Spotswood yet? He's a nurse practitioner, I believe, in Maine, who's pretty involved in open nursing and close with us. And I love that. And there's all sorts of nurses here that are getting really active, and I love it. I love doctors mostly, but it's a great counterpoint to doctors. And the stories I've just heard at home over dinner every day from my mother's experience, it's like, oh boy, you've got your hands full over there with physicians.
Well, I was the director of a nurse practitioner master's program for 20 years.
Wow.
So I've spent a fair amount of time kind of thinking about the theory of nursing and the matter of nursing. And I think there's some sort of rudimentary things that I think people really should understand, which is that medicine really, at least the way it's practiced in this country, is mostly about curing, whereas nursing is really about caring. And there's a bigger deficit for caring than there is for curing. Like, we need nurses.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, how, without disclosing anything you don't want to disclose here, so you came from...
Oh, I know. That was the question, wasn't it? I think that Stan and Christina introduced me to Anne and Sasha.
Oh, wow.
I think, and I'm pretty sure it was at an event at Esalen. And I think it was sometime in the 1990s. And I think it was, in fact, I know it must have been in the 1990s because it was pre-criminalization of MDMA. And I'm just thinking about who was there. Alan Trachtenberg from the Federal Office of Alternative Medicine was naked in the hot tub with all these hippies, like, it was an amazing meeting. And I think that was the first time that I ever met them all, although I knew about them.
Interesting. And was it like an open arms moment? Was it kind of like a careful meeting?
That was a weird thing too, because Anne maintained that, not then so much, but later, she maintained that she actually either knew about me or had met me before, but I had no recollection of that. She did, but I didn't.
That's amazing.
Which is kind of odd.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if it was like an Esalen encounter or something.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And how cool to get, oh, I know you.
Well, it was clear that we had a lot of interests in common. Some of the parts of my early history that I feel more comfortable talking about as opposed to less is that, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm going to be 74 in a couple of weeks. So I was born in 1950. That means I was 16 in 1966. You figure it out, And my parents really didn't like the fact that I was heading in the direction of being this big freak. So they couldn't get me out of California fast enough. And I had this sort of serendipitous opportunity to go to a school that my parents thought would be a good place for me, which is Vassar College, which at that time was a quite proper, Ivy League type of all women.
Where is Vassar?
Poughkeepsie, New York.
Wow.
The Hudson Valley. So I went off in the fall of 1967 to Vassar after having had these LSD experiences that were extremely important to me and troubling to my family. The law of unintended consequences was fully operational because 15 miles away was Millbrook. And I just couldn't get there fast enough or spend enough time there. So I did have that experience.
Peak Millbrook?
No. I didn't arrive there until the place was really kind of disintegrating because of the law enforcement pressure, because the large numbers of people like me who were not like the intellectual lights of New York's, upper whatever, who were just coming there as being curious. And it was there was a lot of pressure on to the extent that there was a community there on the community. And then Millbrook is an estate community, and the people in the people in the village of Millbrook, not the town of Millbrook, which is a more sort of working class group of people, really objected to this. First of all, the influx of all these odd-looking people, and more even, I think, importantly, the reputation that their community was acquiring as a result. And the G. Gordon Liddy was one of the district attorneys at that time, and he kind of made his political reputation by prosecuting and persecuting the people from Millbrook. So that was taking effect at the time. But I was there when a few significant things were still happening. And there were several distinct groups living on the property. The one that I was most close to when I was around there was the ashram, which was the Sri Ram ashram, which was I think they'd been thrown out of another ashram environment somewhere else in New York. And the sort of guru of that group was a guy named Bill Haynes. And Bill Haynes was a piece of work. But they were not, as long as I didn't act like I was for sure the youngest person there that didn't have parents. But as long as I didn't act like a child, I didn't get into very much trouble, and I didn't cause any trouble for anybody else. So I was allowed to be around for a lot of opportunities and experiences and encounters with people, and a certain amount of ingestion on my part. I took a really memorable dose of STP one time while I was there, in which, when I started to like be able to put two coherent sentences together, I decided I was going to cook a meal. I was trying to butter people up. And I did okay until I got to the point where I thought, what we really need for this is a dessert. And I thought, I know, I'll make something really simple. How about a custard? And now this was a big group that, so that this was cooking. We're talking about cooking for like 20 or 30 people. And I made the custard, the stuff that, the egg mixture, but I forgot that you have to put a water bath around a custard so it doesn't curdle. So I put it in the oven, and of course it curdled immediately. And I had used all the eggs in the house. There weren't going to be any eggs for anybody's breakfast the next morning. It's not the kind of place where you can just trip off to the supermarket, because it's a kind of rural community with few shopping spots. And I was mortified because I thought Bill Haynes was going to be mad at me, and that wasn't going to be any fun. So I wanted to get rid of the evidence. And I tried putting the custard down the sink, and it plugged up the entire plumbing in the whole, this was the carriage house that's behind the main house, until custard was erupting out of the toilets. And
oh my gosh,
it was a circus. And I, of course, was not in my normal state of consciousness, which made it even more spectacular. But that, though, I had experiences like that there. And I also had the experience of people who were clearly functioning in realms that were not the one that we mostly are inhabiting in our everyday lives.
Sure.
Like people who would get up and do things together in their dreams.
Yeah. When you're that far out of consensus life and reality, things can happen in interesting ways, I think.
But I was left from that experience with a very abiding fondness for Timothy, who was a major rogue and who had a grin that wrapped all the way around his face and was incredibly charismatic and charming. And when I ended up back on the West Coast to get ready to get some graduate education, the teacher who was the head of the program that I went to had been in Timothy's similar settlement in Zihuatanejo that predated the foundation of the Millbrook.
Is that the IFIF, Internal Foundation for Inner Freedom, or something?
It was the IFIF that went to Zihuatanejo. They were trying to do the same thing. I'm not sure when, that
it was short-lived.
IFIF transmuted into the Castalia Foundation and then into the League for Spiritual Discovery. And the League for Spiritual Discovery was already in place by the time I got to the party, but I don't know how much of that was Castalia. I think Castalia was mostly at Millbrook also. But the teacher who was in charge of the program that I went to had been in Zihuatanejo, and he knew that I had been he knew that we had a kind of common fondness for Tim, and Tim was in a bad reputation state at that point. And this teacher really liked me, and he wasn't the kind of instructor that fooled around with his girl students at all, but he wanted to do something for me. And he said, "I'm going to introduce you to somebody that you might like." And he brought me here to Berkeley and took me to the office of a clinical psychologist. And this was somebody that he, I think, had been in his psychological training with. And we were in the office of this person. And because it was a peer and not a patient, instead of us going up to the psychologist's office, the psychologist came down to us in the waiting room. And he walked in, and my teacher stood up, and the two of them embraced. And I burst into tears, which I had no idea what that was. But I can remember saying to myself, I don't know what this man has, but whatever it is, I want some of it. Well, that was Leo Zeff.
Beautiful. Wow. And you were able to develop a relationship with Leo. That's beautiful.
The only person I've ever used the word guru for. And it was because of Leo and the, contact between Leo and Sasha and people who were associated with Leo, and the MDMA development of MDMA is a useful tool, that I came to really know the Shulgins because of that. Great.
So from Millbrook to Lafayette. Fascinating. I don't want to spend too long on Tim, but I'm a big fan. And the reputation is just so poor. And I don't really understand how people can't like open their minds and hearts a little bit to
It's
Tim.
going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You know why? Because the library's in the New York Public Library.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say something about that because,
This is the Leary Archives.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do I want to say about that? Michael Horowitz and Cindy Palmer, especially Michael Horowitz, really deserves credit for having not allowed the archive to become waterlogged, mildewed, burned, destroyed, seized by the police. He did all of that. But who should get the credit and is never mentioned for getting the archive into the New York Public Library, which is a major stroke of preparedness for a future history that people are going to want to come back and reevaluate what happened during this period. That's important. The person who did that is a woman whose name is Denis Berry. And Denis is a major psychedelic hero, as far as I'm concerned. She was Rosemary Woodruff's roommate when she was still underground. And she's a pal of Rosemary's, really. And after Rosemary resolved her legal difficulties and could start showing up and was also in a lot of ways reconciled with Tim, Denis got to know Tim. And Denis had a business at that time that was called Rent-A-Wife. So she would go pick up your clothes at the cleaners for you and stuff like that. And Tim started using her services, and she's so intelligent, jolly, funny, great, just has the great energy that you want to be around, that more and more she became a part of the scene around Tim. She eventually became the president of the Futique Trust. So it fell to her to negotiate the thing with the New York Public Library, which she did. And I would really like for her to be recognized for that, because for me, somebody who has in my own awareness the experience of seeing a lot of that history with my own eyes, it has unburdened me of the feeling that I have to keep protesting to people, no, you need to take another look at this, because there is an opportunity for anybody who is sincerely robust as a scholar and who wants to really explore that material to do that. God bless you, Denis. Well done. Yeah, she's wonderful. She really is.
There's so much hidden history, especially with women. And it just wasn't, I don't know, for whatever reason, the 50s, 60s, it just wasn't part of what was coming forward.
Well, when the public library actually did the accession of the Leary Library, I mean, I'm the daughter of 4 Italian immigrants. And my father was born on the kitchen table on East 58th Street in New York. And let me tell you, the New York Public Library is the temple of where knowledge is located. And the idea that stuff got into the New York Public Library was such a great thing. And when they did the accession, they had a really fabulous party. There were waiters in tuxedos with beautiful champagne and gorgeous canapes. And it was in the trustees' room, and all sorts of people that are, the long sort of complicated procession of history of psychedelics, and especially of Timothy's history with psychedelics, was really represented there. Robert Thurman and his now wife, who used to be Timothy's wife, and Peggy Hitchcock, people I hadn't seen in a very long time.
It's cool that Peggy came out.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
Interesting.
Lots of people were there. I'm trying to think. It was Peggy there. This was a long time ago. I think she was there. I remember myself being really struck by the fact that there were people there that I hadn't seen in a very long time. And she would be one of the people that would fit that description. So, and, of course, Joanna Harcourt and, all the other folk.
I hope to be able to get with some of her family soon. That'd be amazing.
That's a story. The first extraordinary rendition. Seriously.
Yeah, it's wild, the stuff that was going on. So how do you coming back to the Shulgin world, because that's where we are.
Right, I keep forgetting.
Just so comfortable here. How do you see their legacy and impact, hopefully shaping psychedelia from here?
Well, it's very interesting. I think I've already made reference to one of the things that I really cherish, which is Stan's entirely appropriate and gracious acknowledgement of the fact that his life partner is a co-equal partner in the development of the work that he does. And there have been several of those, and recognition of that kind of the mutual contributions that are made in relationship, such as the one that Christina made to the holotropic breathwork, is you you would have seen that with the Wassons if Valentina Wasson had lived, because the really outstanding, amazing book that they did, The Mushrooms, Russia and History, was really her book. That started out as a cookbook that she was writing with their Russian cook. And it became that other thing that it became. Mm-hmm. But interestingly enough, that book, very much like Pikal and Tikal, is a love story. And I think that the personal elements of the quality of relationship that people who work side by side in that kind of coequality can attain is inspiring for people, and holds out a kind of hope for the ability to move in that direction. And so that's one of the things I think that I think it's very important and useful for us to think of the Shulgins as a couple. Mm-hmm.
Right. They certainly empowered each other in amazing ways.
And they were having a fine time together. They like being around them was fun because they were having fun. Mm-hmm. That's why I think in some ways that's why all these sort of famous parties happened here, was that one of them, at least the 4th of July party, which was a tradition that went on for a while, was because that was their wedding anniversary. That's what we were doing here, was celebrating their wedding anniversary.
That's fun. Wow. And who was it? Bruce Damer. Do you know Bruce? He had this term, conviviality, that he would love to bring up a lot. And I think that's an element that certainly was represented here. Mm-hmm. You don't always hear about it in other psychedelic areas, right? It's so core.
That's absolutely important. And I also want to say, and I feel empowered to introduce this without seeming too stiff, because conviviality is a particular kind of ludic, playful value. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think was really represented here was decorum, deportment. There were certain conventions about how to park. Do not don't go stand in the tall grass and smoke pot. Don't smoke pot at all. Don't negotiate unusual behaviors while you're on this property. Don't besmirch the reputation of your hosts. And don't act out, and when you come to a potluck, bring something for because for sure, functioning in non-ordinary states of consciousness, but also to a slightly less vivid level, functioning as a seamless member of a functioning group, where there's group norms that everybody's more or less willing to abide by. Mm-hmm. There's a short supply of opportunities to learn about that in our society at the moment. And this was one of them, you could be welcome here if you didn't act like a jerk. And people could quickly figure out what acting like a jerk consisted of, so that they would learn that was not okay to do those things, even though it might seem like really spontaneous to park your car so that nobody else could get in or out. You would soon get the stink eye for that.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting and important, right? Where are those spaces now, right? A lot of stuff is contained inside universities, and they don't necessarily have that latitude to be a social platform like that.
It's a unique combination of conviviality and the presence of elders who are empowered by the fact that it is their environment to be able to set some parameters about what's going to happen there.
Mm-hmm. I like that quite a bit. And, to bring the cannabis thing back up, there's serious legal situations that could happen if cannabis was around.
There are serious fire situations that could happen if cannabis was around.
You mentioned the tall grass, so that makes sense.
That's because I have the image of having chased somebody away who was doing that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Fire. I'm from the Northeast, so wildfires and things like that weren't really on my radar until I moved a little more west, and now it's a real deal. I remember one fire situation where it was illegal to smoke any kind of cigarette, even with your window slightly down in your car. You had to have your windows all the way up or be inside your house, not even on your deck. It's crazy. But that's a reality out here that people don't super get. And this idea of decorum is super interesting to me. Yeah, because there should be some sort of social rules, and people who are in some sort of leadership position or eldership position should have a big say.
In order to be really comprehensive about what I'm trying to say, I should also add to that I think the elder position, and this is me sort of brainstorming about what's going to happen with this property now. The elder position both includes being able to be the host, the person who extends a welcome and says hello and all that, and who kind of sets up what kind of a party it is and how much latitude is going to be granted to people, but also makes it possible for people who have crossed that line, who have transgressed in some identifiable way, to be reintegrated back into the community. Which that's this is something that I, as a person who's kind of, at the very least, I have a lot of gray hair. I'm kind of tending in the direction of elderhood, not necessarily wisdom, but oldness. The social innovations of the moment are reevaluating a lot of behaviors for how socially acceptable they will continue to be as we move forward in human history. And it can be really dizzying because people's history of behaviors that were reasonably acceptable at the time that they performed them can be and have been identified in ways that really lead to those people being ostracized. And I'm not suggesting that, weird behaviors be excused, but I do think that it's important for people to be able to learn and appreciate what needs to be corrected and corrected, and then have a path to be welcomed back. And I think that's one of the things that particularly Anne was able to provide for people.
Yeah. And you're so diplomatic about it. And it's lovely. But there's some people in this space that have like energies and behaviors that are not fun to be around. And in some cases are very threatening to be around. And yeah, I would love to be able to engage with those people again. But it's like, how do you get over that?
Well, now I was about to go on. I was going to say, don't get me wrong. It's not like Anne didn't close the iron door on some people.
Right. Yeah. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Like I've certainly done that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would love to have repaired that, but I just don't see the path. Right. Like in some social situations, there is a path.
Yeah. And it depends on what the issue is,
That's a big deal in our space. Like we get really amplified, especially as we perhaps overuse.
Well, it's also because there's such a extreme level of vulnerability that comes along with entering these worlds, and
legally and otherwise.
Absolutely. And people legally is one of the ones, like I've seen people get really ostracized when they got into legal trouble because it's like a contagious illness. People don't want to get near it because they're afraid they're going to get it,
Which is tragic, but also fair in a lot of ways, right? It's a tough one. Yeah, I saw that with one of my friends who had some legal issues somewhat recently, and it was really sad. Thankfully, I minimized my risk profile quite a bit, and I was okay, but everybody else didn't, and it was sad to see just the ostracization. And you've probably seen a lot of it. Like
I've also seen people behave in a really stand-up way in very difficult situations, though.
That's great. Yeah.
One of my communal family was spent 3 years in the federal penitentiary for a cannabis arrest. You can imagine that. And despite never having been caught with $1 bill or one leaf of cannabis, it was all conspiracy charges. Never gave up any information about anybody or did anything to anybody else's detriment, and just did it.
Yeah. And that's a model, folks. Like there are going to be more arrests in this space, and it's tragic, but it's a reality. Yeah. And can you protect tens of other people by making the right decision? And and what is that right decision? It's a hard thing, but it's important.
And I can speak about this in relation to the cannabis world because I was in a primary care practice that was one of the first really kind of conventional primary care medicine environments that thoroughgoingly adopted cannabis as a part of our armamentarium.
Amazing.
And so I've had a couple thousand visits with people in which I've talked about their medical cannabis use over years. And my physician colleague, who was the person who really started that, was boiled in oil by the Medical Quality Assurance Board only to have them after 2 years and thousands of dollars worth of investigation say, well, you didn't do anything wrong. I mean, terrible, terrible, terrible. But I forget where I was going with that. Oh, cannabis. Like I can just say I live in northern Mendocino County, and I'm sure you see this in Colorado as well. A big grow is not a one-person deal.
No.
And so all those people who are involved in that project, they all have to be impeccable, because all it takes is one person to forget to take the addresses out of the garbage before you take it to the dump. And pretty soon, everybody's on the barbecue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I encourage folks to make it a team sport, but you have to be really tight with your team. And some people just aren't appropriate to be on your team.
Well, but see, that comes back to the concern about decorum, which is, that's an old lady's concern for sure, but it is useful. People don't keep doing the same thing for generations if it doesn't work at all,
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Agreed. And valuable insight in a lot of ways, folks. Take that one in. Think about that, roll that around a little bit. There's so much there. So we're almost out of time, which is tragic because this has been so fun. But what kind of, do you have any kind of message for let's say, mid-20 something that's really curious about this movement in a,
Patience, grasshopper. Life is long and full of surprises.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would say when faced with the imagination, the sensation, the expectation that somebody has to make an important choice, I would say try to choose the alternative, if there are several, the one that forecloses the fewest possible other alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
That would be one. Another one would be, ideally, if you're going to make an important decision or move in an important direction in your life, I would like to think that a sunbeam would come shine in the window and light up one of those squares of tile. And that's the one you're supposed to go stand on.
Mm.
And if it's any less clear than that, you're probably going too fast.
And many are going too fast. Yeah. Well, right.
One more thing.
Please.
And that is, I was fortunate to be told by a person whom I really respected and who had a very good reason to know that I could not become a shaman when I was 25. And the reason that I couldn't was that there's no role with that label on it in the society that I live in.
Mm-hmm.
The fortunate thing about that for me was that I was able to find midwifery as an identifiable social role. I couldn't just step into it. I had to go and get my education, but it was a place where the society in which I was currently living would allow me, and in fact encourage me, to make use of the capacities and insights that had come to me through some of my more unusual experiences. And that bridge from your eyes pop open and you think, oh, this is really important and I want to do it a lot, to gathering up your chops and getting yourself in place where your society can accept you as a function of something, it's worth putting the time in for that.
It's beautiful. Maria, I hope we can do this again. Thank you so much for all your time and all the effort you've put into the space. It's amazing. It's amazing to get to meet you finally. So thank you so much.
This is fun.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Until next time.
Okay.
Thank you. And there you have it, Maria Mangini, Ph.D., FNP. And I really, really, really loved that episode. I really loved being able to be in person with Maria. I've heard her name forever, and this is my first real engagement with her in a real way. So loved that. All right. Well, follow up. Maybe learn more about the farm if you're interested. There's going to be a lot of events there, cleanups, classes, all sorts of fun community events. So check that out. See if you can get involved and learn more about Maria. There's all sorts of really fun stuff out there that Maria's got her fingerprints on. So great stuff. All right. I think that's it for now. Thank you all for tuning in to Psychedelics Today. Please tell a friend, leave us a positive review somewhere, and we will see you on the next episode. I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day. We'll see you next time.